Australia is renowned for producing high-quality foods thanks to its vast tracts of land and good climate. Foreign investors have recognised this and are spending billions of dollars buying up agribusinesses and farmland. But in the face of a looming global food shortage, some Australians worry this nation may be losing its natural resources to foreign ownership. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. On this edition of 101 Eats, we ask, is Australia selling out on its own food security?
Come on, get up in there. Come on, get up in there. I've got 5 grandchildren. That's why I get out at this hour of the morning to try and keep something for them.
Owning a dairy farm has been a long-standing dream for Jim and Pauline Hersey. That dream became a reality 4 years ago when they bought this farm in northern Tasmania.
682, is that right, Pauline? 682. It's a healthy lifestyle. It's very special. I don't have my family around me a lot. The downside, 14 days a week and 48 hours a day.
It's out in the wet and the cold, all the elements of the weather. They've just got to keep pushing themselves, pushing their bodies to the limit.
Jim's never been afraid of hard work, but he wasn't able to do anything about the global recession that saw milk prices being slashed to record lows.
We was getting above 38 cents and then we went back to 18 cents a litre, and which is well below what it cost us to produce the stuff. So therefore the bills just started mounting up all around the place. There's a lot of people that go to work for no money, but how many do you know that actually go to work while it's still costing them money? And that's what sort of boat we was in. It was actually costing us to go to work every day.
Reluctantly, the Herseys decided to put up their farm for sale. The irony is that as they struggle to pay their bills, the demand for milk and dairy products has soared worldwide, especially in China, where a growing middle class has changed its diet. A decade ago, most Chinese didn't drink milk, and powdered milk was an unaffordable luxury. But now, with rising incomes, comes increased demand.
Chinese investment in dairies is just mind-blowing when you get over there and see it. It rivals the US and indeed the Saudi investments in dairies, or the types of dairies that they're running. We've seen 50, 60, 70,000 heifers a year go out of Australia for the last 7 or 8 years, and those Australian genetics are what's driving the expansion of the dairy industry in China.
And now the Chinese are looking at buying up dairy farms and other agricultural assets in Australia. Local media reports and political tensions are fueling a growing tide of opposition to foreign ownership. But farmers like Jim say they have little choice.
I'm an Australian, not a Chinaman. Definitely dead against it. But if I go broke and lose everything, there's not a damn thing I can do for them. So I think I'm starting to get where I've got my hands tied. Do I sell to someone from another country and at least probably be able to give the kids, something to pay off their house or help them a little bit? Or do I sit back and go broke and then the kids have got to probably help support me and their mum?
It's a dilemma that's been troubling estate agent Betty Kay for a long time. She's been in the industry for over 20 years and has a lot of sympathy for the farmers. Currently, she has about 25 to 30 farms up for sale.
I have visits or phone calls every week. There would not be a week goes by that I do not get a phone call from a farmer wanting to know, are the investors coming? Have I got a buyer?
In June this year, she visited an international dairy expo in Shanghai to drum up interest in Tasmanian dairy farms.
On that first day, we could have given away every DVD and brochure that we had because they were quite amazed with the properties and the interest. I had 85 business cards given to me from interested people.
But when she returned to Tasmania with potential investors, she was surprised by the anti-Chinese sentiment.
I suppose they don't want to see other countries come in and buy up our land like I've read it in the papers.
Betty Kay, what a brilliant woman. She's still out there, busting herself, getting insulted by people, you know, saying how wrong it is what she's doing, but at least she's out there trying to do something for us.
By a hot fella, you know, like they would.
But you said this morning when you come.
Betty believes the Chinese can inject some much-needed stimulus into the Tasmanian economy.
If they could come here and pay our farmers more money, then why shouldn't we be taking the most of the opportunities? After all, it's our Australian farmer and our primary industry we've got to look after. Other people don't seem to understand. The farmers are not getting enough return for their products and the hard work that they put into the properties.
We really need to educate people to have a new respect for food. And that actually means paying farmers a fairer price for the food that they get. And if you paid farmers a fairer price, you wouldn't have so many Australian farmers having to sell up to foreign buyers.
It's estimated that in the next 40 years, the global population will reach 9 billion people. That's an awful lot of mouths to feed and an awful lot of cows that are going to need milking. But the farmers here think there's simply no incentive to stay in the game. And they also believe that government isn't doing enough to ensure food security for the whole country. Unlike Australia's mining and property industries, the sale of farming land does not need to be reported to Australia's Foreign Investment Review Board unless the sale is bigger than $231 million. It means many farmers like Jim can quietly give up and sell their farms without attracting attention from government. And this unchecked foreign investment is starting to ring alarm bells around the country. Someone who believes time is running out for Australia to ensure its future food security is author and professor Julian Cribb. He says the days of cheap food are over, and future generations may well come to view cookbooks as symbols of evil.
Well, the cookbook is a symbol of the belief that there is an endless and bountiful supply of food, that we needn't worry. All of our recipe books and our TV chef programs and things like that encourage us to believe that food is endless. It's not endless. We have to attend to the resources that produce our food, or the food supply will be in danger of failure.
He says famine causes mass migration, and even a net exporter of food like Australia will suffer.
Very few governments internationally understand how perilous the food situation is. We had a food shock in 2008, and we're having another food shock now due to the Russian drought. That tells us that world food supply is a lot less secure than it used to be. But our government doesn't seem all that aware of it.
Julian believes the issue of food security is even more pressing than global warming.
It can happen within weeks. You could see the price of food in the supermarkets double or even triple if there was a serious food famine in some part of the world. Whereas climate change is a slow burning issue, it's going to get progressively worse all through the century. It is a factor in the food scarcity and the food insecurity. And it is very often going to be the case that climate is what will drive the food shocks of the future.
But big business says Australia needs the foreign investment and is welcoming the interest shown by China.
I believe that a strong and fruitful relationship with China and Zhejiang province will be the foundation of our mutual prosperity in the coming years.
Investors at this business forum in Sydney believe the Chinese will invest more than $3 billion in Australia next year.
It extends right around the world, not just China. We're doing business with people from the Middle East, with people from the US, from the UK. But China has got a policy at government level, and certainly within private enterprise, of food security. And we've been dealing with some of the larger food producing companies or food manufacturing companies out of China, Chongqing, China Bright, and keen to continue those discussions and relationships.
And investors laugh off fears that China will dominate Australia's agricultural industries.
We export about 50 to 60% of the milk we produce already. Our milk pricing structures are geared to global prices and global demand. So having new owners, and imagine if they bought 20,000 dairy cows or set up a 20,000 cow operation, that's less than 1% of Australia's total production. So the concern that's been generated, particularly in political circles of the last 6 or 8 weeks, is misplaced.
My dear friend, don't worry too much, because I think it's really different than before. We will do win-win situation. We won't do anything bad to Australia, so don't worry about that.
Many Australian businessmen believe foreign ownership of agricultural assets is simply the new business model for the future, where money-rich but asset-poor countries will continue to buy up land and water where they can. They say foreign companies will still expect locals to provide Australian expertise.
The future lies more and more and more in a corporate style of management, not ownership, not necessarily ownership, that we need economies of scale. We need supply chain relationships. We need very sound capital structures underneath our farms. That will be the transition that we go through in the next 5 to 10 years.
He says even the small farms will need to get bigger.
We've seen an inexorable growth in the size of Australian dairy herds. When I left university 20 years ago, the average dairy herd was about 120, 130 cows. We're now looking at a 600 cows being average, and you really need to be in the 1,000 cow plus to be in business.
But Jim says without government help or better dairy prices, he is simply unable to increase the size of his farm.
We should be milking on this farm at least 260 cows at the moment. We're milking 180 because we had to sell all of our young stock off to stop from going broke. The milk companies want more milk. They're making millions of profit, but they won't give us enough price to be able to hold our stock. Like a lot of these calves, they're going overseas. You know, it's just ridiculous. We need the stock here in Australia to produce what they want, and we've got to sell them overseas to try and stay afloat.
The Australian government has acknowledged these concerns. It's commissioned the Australian Bureau of Statistics to do an audit into farm sales. It's also established a working group made up of industry and scientists to look at establishing a national food security agency. Two top priorities will be to fund more research and development in agriculture and look at ways to encourage more young people into the industry.
When you look at it, most of the wars of the last 20 or 30 years have at the bottom of them a food crisis or a fight over agricultural land or water. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution both destroyed their governments over a bread crisis. So we know that if you have a food crisis, it can tear down governments. That's when governments get scared, and that's when they start doing something.
You tell me someone in the world you know that can go about food. So why is it not important to do something about it?
Coming up after the break, we ask if Australia is selling out on its own food security. Stay with 101 East. And welcome back to 101 East. This week we come to you from Sydney, Australia, where there is a growing debate over foreign ownership of this country's agribusinesses and farmland. Joining us now on the panel is Senator Bill Heffernan, who headed the Senate inquiry into Australian food production.
G'day.
Also on the panel is Michael Gordon, whose company is employed by the Qatar-based Hassad Foods Group, which owns several agri-businesses here in Australia. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's been reported there's something like $9 billion of agricultural asset that's been sold to offshore interests just in the last 2.5 years or so. Michael, if I could start with you, is Australia really in danger of losing its food security?
I don't believe so. The number you mentioned there, 9 billion, I'm staggered by that, so I'd be interested to hear the background behind that. But specifically to your question, I don't believe so. We're very much a net exporter of what we produce. I think it's very important that we monitor and track any investment that goes on within this country. But as we currently sit, I don't see a threat to that.
You don't see a threat to that. Senator?
This is something that's gone completely under the radar. There's nothing wrong with foreign investment. The difficulty we've got to face up to is we're looking at countries that have a sovereign fund to acquire other countries' sovereign assets and eventually exclude that country from access to their own assets to create their own food security.
I'll get back to that point in just a moment. But Michael, if I can just get back to you on this, do you think there could ever be a possibility that there's too much foreign investment in Australia when it comes to the agribusinesses and farmland?
Look, I think you can extrapolate anything out and say it can be too much, and so quite obviously you could find a position where it's too much, but
What
need
is too
to.
much?
Well,
What,
exactly.
in your opinion, is
well,
too
I think that's very much the point. It's a very difficult question to answer because what is too much? I think it's more a case of bringing it back into context as to what we're dealing with. As I said earlier, I think it's very important for every country to monitor who's acquiring land, whether it be overseas capital or internal capital. We've got a competition watchdog that works domestically within this country.
Does that competition watchdog work,
No,
Senator?
this is completely off the radar. $231 million is the trigger point for the Foreign Investment Review Board to look at this. If we don't have a long-term plan like a lot of the Arab states, India, Japan, Korea, Singapore, where they're going on the African continent now buying from the poorer countries some of the better agricultural land, not to secure the food task for the poorer countries and their people, but for themselves. And bear in mind, in a lot of these transactions, especially in Asia and on some of the African continent, they are some fairly serious corrupt operators.
Well, let me just ask you then, what is wrong with that? What is wrong with a foreign government trying to secure food for their own people if the Australian government is not interested in helping out their own farmers?
We've got to be, well, we are. We're a huge contributor to the global food task.
Then why are farmers selling off to foreign ownership?
I'm very much of the view that we ought to be selling our surplus food production to the people that need our food rather than selling the farm, because if you have sovereign wealth funds, and Canada learned this the hard way, acquiring your sovereign assets and then excluding you from access to them, you've got a serious problem. This just doesn't apply to production. But
Michael, the Senator definitely paints a very pessimistic view. What do you think? Is it as bad as the Senator says it is?
Again, I think you need to be specific as to what we're talking about. Are we talking about...
We're talking about Australia losing its food security to foreign ownership.
Again, that needs to be put into context.
All right,
I think that's too broad brush. We're not in danger of losing our food security. For instance, Cape York Peninsula...
Well, then what are you in danger of losing?
Let me explain.
Well, tell me, what are you in danger of losing? What is your concern?
We do not have a 50-year or an 80-year plan in Australia to say, where are we going to be
Your
in 50
concern
or 80
then
years?
is the fact that Australia does not have a food security long-term plan. But at the same time, you've been going on and on about foreign ownership of agribusinesses and
certainly have, and
farmland here.
defining it as the greater... We need... Foreign capital is part of the business of doing business. And the Vesties came out here. When did they come out here? A long time ago. No trouble at all. But when it becomes sovereign wealth funds, foreign sovereign wealth funds acquiring our sovereign assets and then excluding us from access to the production of those assets, obviously you have a long-term problem.
Michael, let me just throw this question to you then. You know, the Qatar-based Hassad Foods has employed your company to run its agri-businesses here in Australia. Do you see that the way of the future for Australian farms?
Our company's been employed to establish the production base in Australia, to assist in the establishment of the production base. The benefits that come from that is obviously another capital source coming in to the industry. Agriculture is a very thin market when looking at properties buying and selling, and there's a whole range of reasons behind that. There's been a progressive ageing of the population of farmers, driven mostly by falling terms of trade, which has then led to a number of farm sizes being sub-economic. What this capital means is that there's an ability for some aggregation to go on, and that's a positive. Secondly, it enables career paths to be created. One of the large things, the agricultural college I went to when I was there in the 80s, probably 80% of the graduates went back into farming. Now I think it's maybe 5%. So what I see the great opportunity with the Hassad project is that we're able to create a corporate farming business, and we're mirroring that as close as we can to a family corporate farming business, because they've proven to be very successful, as has the family farm.
Well, Senator, can I then ask you, do you see this perhaps as the way of the future for farming businesses?
We don't want to end up as a nation of tenant farmers. If you don't have some regulation, don't have some oversight, and don't have a plan, and you are dealing with countries that have a non-market currency, that's exactly what will happen.
I have to ask this question, really. How much is this row over foreign ownership of agribusinesses and of farmland. How much is this linked to Australia's renowned xenophobia? Is it perhaps linked to the sentiment of, oh, foreign ownership may take away or may ruin Australia's way of life or the culture?
We are totally committed to foreign capital. If we allow countries that have non-market currency to acquire our assets, the problem isn't the farmer, it isn't the foreign public company where you can go to a board meeting and throw things at the chairman, it is sovereignty.
Why should Australians care about this?
Why
should Australians care about this issue?
Have a look about here. If you want to maintain this lifestyle, you've got to care. Do nothing and you get eaten.
Michael?
Well, I think...
Should Australians fear the future?
Fear is a very emotive word.
Yes.
When you look at it in context, the company that we're working with represents a very, very small percentage of production that we currently do. We export 6.5 million live sheep. Our target, which is on the public record, is 150,000. You know, it's a very, very small percentage.
What do you think should be Australia's plan going into the future?
That's a very big question. The
well, what should be Australia's priority then?
The priority with regard to agriculture should be along the lines of understanding what our internal requirements are and what our productive capacity is and what's going to impact on that, and tracking that forward. So that means enhancing our own productivity through various measures, and equally monitoring anything that's going to impact on that balance.
Senator, you're afraid that Australia doesn't have a plan. What should be Australia's plan?
Well, I mean, for a start, we ought to look at what Mother Nature's doing to Australia. The 50-year snapshot of Australia is the south is going to dry out. We're going to absolutely have to reconfigure the way we've settled and do business in rural and regional Australia. We've got 3 great catchments in the north of Australia which are virtually undeveloped. And all of that's part of the future. And I have to tell you that what's in your fridge in the future is going to be far more important than what's in your garage. And if we don't do this job for ourselves in Australia, someone else will come and do it for us, and we won't have a choice.
Thank you very much for being with us today. That's all the time we have for this edition of 101 East. You can always follow the program through our website, podcast and Facebook. From all the team here in Sydney, Australia, thanks for watching.